questions period. So I would now like to ask if there are any questions from the gallery. Yes, hello, Mr. Lowell. Yeah, you may proceed. Welcome back.
The impact of the constitutional amendment, the impact that the constitutional amendment has to democratic representation is clearly an issue that's been noticed by students. The Brock Press opinion editor, Noah Nickel, wrote, "To only guarantee BUSAC as much power as the board of directors is willing to give them doesn't really inspire hope in me as a student that BUSAC will be entirely representative of the student body. I raised similar concerns and asked about this at council in previous weeks. The response last week from Mr. Ahuja was, as promised, a review will be done. So what will this review look like? And in what way will council and the public at large be included in this promised review process?"
Are there any councillors who wish to answer this question? Yes, councillor.
Thank you for that question. So right now, as I've been stated, a review will be done. We are making sure that the constitutional referendum is successful before we go into the research. But once we have more information, we can
Is the review not currently underway, and if not, why not?
Are there any councillors who wish to answer this question? Yes, councillor.
So this is sort of one of the steps as part of the process we will be going through in the future based on legal and also professional governance advice we receive. So some of the changes that we're seeing in the constitutional referendum for governance moving forward, and see if we can find any opportunity to further improve and maintain representation both at our council as well as board.
Will council be included in the process of review?
Absolutely.
BUSAC complied with the Student Choice Initiative and raised concerns about the impact of the provincial policy. Why has BUSAC been willing to vocalize opposition to provincial law, but not voice opposition for a law which has the consequence of a 5-fold reduction in elected representation?
Are there any councillors who wish to answer this?
Can I ask the guests to repeat their question?
Yeah. BUSAC expressed concerns with provincial policy when there were OSAP cutbacks in the Student Choice Initiative. Why not express concerns in a provincial policy that affects student representation?
Councillor Khan?
Well, at this stage, we don't feel it significantly affects student representation as you suggest it to be. So, and again, we don't feel that it affects representation, student representation on our campus so much so that we pose strong opposition to the provincial government.
Could you, I'm sorry, speak up just a little bit, I didn't get into that.
Sure. I say that at this stage we don't have a strong, we don't feel that
We have a strong opposition to the changes that are being made to
the Corporations Act.
Madam Speaker, if I may add a few words. So just speaking from somebody who, relies on OSAT from that, I definitely agree that it's far more of a student concern. It's actually a student concern versus with a lot of experience on student council. I've seen that this actual provincial law is putting BUSAC in a place where there's a review that needs to be done in order to maintain not-for-profit status. But at the end of the day, we are, from what I've felt, a very collaborative group where we can mitigate these changes and we can navigate them in a way that will maintain the student representation that we strive to have with our organization all the time, versus things such as OSAP cuts, which have a very detrimental effect on students' ability to even enroll in post-secondary education in the first place. So I just wanted
according to bylaw 400, 5.2, election and referendums must be completed by October 31st. I asked about this last week, and the CRO referenced, quote, poor student conduct in Halloween, and I'd like to give the CRO here the opportunity to clarify what was meant by this.
Would you like to answer that question?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. The date was actually voted on by council, so obviously by members, student body agreed on this date, and it was a better date because Halloween, obviously, you know, on university campuses aren't the best dates to host events, and we felt like posting it on November 7th would be a more professional date, and it suited the student schedule much more.
Thank you, yeah. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Through you, Mr. Leopold, it would be okay if I actually just add one little component to that, because we did do some diligence on that, if that's okay with you, through the speaker, however.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so we actually did, about the October 31st deadline, we actually did consult legal counsel. And on legal counsel actually indicated that, and I'll quote, that these, in terms of the change of date, are very minimal departures from the document which BUSAC has full control over. So these are very minimal departures from a document which BUSAC has full control over, and there is no detriment to the members. So that is the advice that we received. The second thing that we did receive, and I will again quote, that just give me a quick second here, that and again, there doesn't appear to be any detriment to the students provided they have sufficient notice of the referendum question. That was the advice that we received at that time. So the October 31st date was known. To add something further to that, is that it wasn't just Halloween. So on Friday, there was an Indian Student Association event that was actually sold out. There was an USAC GA, and USAC is actually with us today, and our government and advocacy relations unit was completely engaged in that activity as well. So it wasn't just a Halloween celebration, it was actually quite a busy place around here. And again, BUSAC brought that forward well in advance. It actually came forward in the summer. They decided as a group who have control over that they were going to move that 1 week later. It wasn't felt by legal counsel, and clearly it wasn't felt by this group, because I think it was carried 18-0, I think. You can look that up. And as a result, that decision was made. So that is the advice that we received at that point in time. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
That's a bit of stuff to digest. Now, I don't have too much time, and I did come prepared with other questions, so I'm going to proceed forward, but I'd love to return back to that in a moment if I can. Last week, I asked Mr. Johnson how BUSU has been accountable to the promises of the October 2018 infraction investigation report. In response, he said that the bylaw was amended. However, the current bylaw 400 was ratified in September of 2018. So Mr. Johnson, please clarify, as a member of GEN, what steps has BUSU taken to be accountable to the promise to work arduously to address referendum unfairness?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Johnson, are you comfortable answering this?
Yeah, I'm comfortable. So first of all, Madam Speaker, I just want to apologize. Last meeting, I was not fully prepared because this was circumstances from last year. But what I have done is I went back to last year to all the emails I sent as chair of the committee, and also the minutes that I took from the many meetings that we did have. It was a very busy committee last year because most of us will remember there was actually a special election and quite a bit going on last year in terms of governance and elections. But I did look back as to all the concerns brought forth by students as well as by Mr. Ligatali, and so I'll expand on that right now because I feel much more prepared at this meeting. So I first want to bring up that in my role, I really try to talk with students about BUSA matters and such. So, for example, like when Mr. Jalib announced the expanded coverage for the health and dental plan, I shared that in the various study group chats that I'm in, and I share that so that in fulfilling my role, I'm engaging with the students as a proper representative. So, shout out to Assad for that, and just as an example of what I really want to mention here. So, I've been at the forefront of these kinds of issues around levies and such for a while, and actually at the BUSAC, there was quite a lengthy discussion about student choice initiative and about student fees and all that, because there are all kinds of perspectives to bring up about this. So in terms of the referendum and visiting the fairness of the yes and no side, I just really wanted to bring that it was quite a difficult task, but that I felt we did fulfill our job. So I feel that our governance structure is robust in ensuring fair processes and accountability to the decisions on behalf of the membership. So the past years that I've been here, we've had great representatives from athletics, from club members, those involved with student entrepreneurship, and I've seen how that value contributes to our governance structure. So with that, Madam Speaker, it's stated in Bylaw 400 that the administration of the electoral process is overseen by the Chief Returning Officer. So last year that was James Hall, and as a background, he was extensively involved at Brock. He actually ended up graduating with the Spirit of Brock Medal from the Board of Trustees because of his positive contributions to the school. So the reason why I bring that up is because in fulfilling his roles as CRO, he was the right person to make sure student interest was a priority during that process. And at the same time, our elections committee, with the student representatives in it, also made sure that we were bringing forward student interest to navigate the situation with many different perspectives surrounding the engagement levy. So with that, there was the investigation report, of course, about fairness, which was brought forward by Mr. Hall. And so it spoke about a few issues, namely using BUSA's social media and APSS during leave. Those were, and all of those things that were brought up by Mr. Liggett-Falvey's comments online, those were all actually addressed by the CRO, Mr. Hall. So we were privy to that as a committee when we were addressing it because he brought all those forward with full transparency. However, it was us as the student representative body that made the decision for how we were going to handle the infractions and the sanctions for what had happened there, as well as what our plan was moving forward. So just to point out, that the standing orders of BUSAC actually have higher legislative authority over the bylaws, and so for that reason, we're able to do important things to uphold what the students would like, including making sure that there's a fair process, even though, for example, amending the bylaws, for example, Bylaw 400 may take a little while because of it has to go through 2 readings for BUSAC as the current process stands. So we were actually cognizant of that as a committee because we wanted to make sure we were efficient. So for example, I mentioned the special election that was in December, and what we had to do as BUSAC was we had to amend the election period because according to the bylaws, it would have had to run over into exams. And that would not be good for the students because they would have to be voting in the middle of their exam period, which is it's a very stressful period for students, as you know. So we had to amend that at a council level with the standing orders of BUSAC, and so that's how it passed without the bylaws. As for the addressing fairness within the yes and the no side.
Am I out of time?
We'll just allow Ben to finish his thought, and then we will end question period at that point. That's okay?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So during that period, that's an example of how the standing orders of BUSAC and other levels of our legislation need to uphold student interest. And the reason why I bring that up is because, Madam Speaker, Mr. Liggett-Falvey has frequently been citing bylaws, whereas there's a lot of cases where there's higher legislative authority that is more effective in making sure that the students' interests are brought forward, for example, during a referendum period. So that includes common practice and precedents for for what was used during the yes and no side. And so we discussed this as a committee, and we saw that there was a perceived bias for if there was a student who wanted to run a no side, we didn't want there to be a perceived bias that would deter them from doing a no side. So we addressed all these things, and I don't have much time right now, but there's a lot more that our committee discussed that it seems we haven't been looking into. But in terms of what was done, when I mentioned there were the amendments to bylaw 400, we did actually discuss that as a committee. But there were a few things that happened because one thing was that our previous director of government operations recommended that we look into legalities in the omnibus agreement, which kind of pushed things back a bit because that wasn't finalized until later. So because council actually dissolved, so to speak, at the end of April, then we actually weren't able to, as a committee, push forward those amendments through. So we actually made those changes, and I actually spoke of them during BUSAC several times last year, but we never actually got around to bringing that to council. However, as I mentioned before, it's implemented through the higher levels of our legislative authority, so that, for example, using BUSU's social media or website and things like that, that was actually addressed. It couldn't be amended in the bylaws immediately because we had to push that back, but it was addressed, and I reported on that. So that's all from me right now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Seeing as our open question period has exhausted, are there any counselors who wish to extend the question period at this time? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Liggett-Falvey. Thank you, counselors. We will